The morning sky over Seoul turned dark as massive silver ships descended through the clouds. Commander Hyunwoo Park pressed his face against the bunker window, watching the alien vessels settle over the city like giant metal birds. Each ship was longer than 3 football fields, their surfaces smooth and gleaming. "Sir, we're getting reports from Tokyo, New York, and London," Sergeant Minho Kim called out from the radio station. "Same thing happening everywhere. No response to our communications." Hyunwoo had been preparing for this moment ever since. The deep space monitors detected the approaching fleet 3 days ago, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of seeing Earth's first alien visitors. Hovering silently above his home city, the ships didn't attack immediately. Instead, they waited. For 2 hours, they simply floated there while millions of people stared up at them from the streets below. Then the bottom panels of each ship opened, and smaller craft began pouring out like insects from a hive. Dr. So-young Lee was in her laboratory at Seoul National University when the first transport ships landed in the courtyard. Through her window, she watched tall, gray-skinned beings emerge from the vessels. They moved with perfect coordination, as if they shared the same mind. Each alien carried a small device that glowed with blue light. The aliens didn't speak, didn't make demands or issue warnings. They simply began walking through the crowds of terrified humans, pointing their devices at people. When the device glowed green, the aliens would mark that person with a small tag that stuck to their clothing. So-young realized with growing horror that they were selecting people. But why these particular individuals? Jin-ho was running his morning route along the Han River when the selection began. The marathon runner had competed in 3 Olympics and could run farther than almost anyone in Korea. When 2 aliens approached him, their device immediately turned green before he could react. They had tagged him and moved on to examine other people nearby. Most of the others they ignored. But when they found Yoonji, kindergarten teacher who was shielding a group of children behind an overturned car, their device glowed bright green. He tagged her too. Young Soo was different from the others. He worked in a factory making car parts. Nothing special about him except that when the alien ships first appeared, he had immediately started organizing his neighbors. He helped elderly people find shelter, distributed water to families, and kept everyone calm with his steady voice and practical plans. The aliens found him directing traffic around a collapsed building, and their device lit up like a Christmas tree. By noon, the pattern became clear across the city. The aliens weren't randomly selecting people. They were choosing specific types: athletes, teachers, doctors, soldiers, leaders, and anyone who showed unusual courage or strength. Haijin, a violinist who had continued playing music to calm frightened children even as buildings shook around her, found herself tagged. Dongmin, a firefighter who had rescued 17 people from a collapsed apartment building, selected too. The transport ships returned in the afternoon. The aliens began collecting their chosen humans, loading them into the vessels without explanation. Families screamed and fought, but the aliens' technology was far beyond human capability. Anyone who tried to resist found themselves paralyzed by some kind of energy beam. So-young was among the first to be taken. As alien hands guided her toward a transport ship, she noticed something important. The beings showed no emotion, no cruelty or kindness. They treated the humans like objects, to be sorted and moved. Their movements were efficient and purposeful, suggesting they had done this many times before. "Where are you taking us?" she called out, but the aliens didn't respond. They didn't seem to understand human speech, or perhaps they simply didn't care to answer. Jin-ho found himself in the same transport as Yoonji and Youngsoo. The teacher was trying to comfort a crying teenager who had been separated from his family. The factory worker was already studying the inside of the alien ship, looking for weaknesses or escape routes. "This isn't random," Jin-ho whispered as quietly as he could. "They're taking specific people for specific reasons." "But what reasons?" Jung-ji asked, still holding the frightened boy. Youngsoo looked around at their fellow prisoners. "Look at who they chose. Okay, Pete's, leaders, people who don't give up easily. People others look up to." The realization hit So-young like a cold wave. They're taking the strong ones first. In every society, if you want to control a population, you remove the natural leaders. the ones who might organize resistance. As their transport ship lifted off from Earth's surface, the selected humans pressed against the small windows to watch their home planet shrink below them. None of them knew where they were going or what awaited them, but each understood instinctively that their real test was just beginning. The aliens had made their first mistake, though they didn't know it yet. They had assumed that taking away humanity's strongest individuals would weaken the species. But they had never encountered a species where strength came not from individual power, but from the connections between people and their refusal to abandon hope, no matter how desperate their situation became. The alien facility stretched deep, underground like a giant ant colony. So-young found herself in a white room with no windows, just bright lights that never turned off. The walls were smooth metal, and a single door sealed shut with no handle on the inside. She had been here for 3 days, and the only sounds were the hum of machinery and footsteps in the corridor outside. The aliens had separated all the humans immediately after arrival. So-young hadn't seen Jinho, Youngji, or any of the others since they were unloaded from the transport ship. She wondered if they were even still alive. On the 4th day, 2 aliens entered her cell. They attached small metal discs to her temples and wrists, then strapped her to a chair facing a large screen. The aliens spoke to each other in clicking sounds, completely ignoring her questions. The screen flickered to life, showing images of soul burning. Buildings collapsed while people ran screaming through the streets. So-young's heart pounded as she recognized her neighborhood, her university, places she had known all her life. "This is not real," she said firmly. "You're trying to break my spirit with fake pictures." The aliens made notes on their devices but didn't respond. Images continued for hours. So-young forced herself to look away, to think about other things. But the sounds kept pulling her attention back to the screen. In another cell, Jinho faced a different kind of torture. The aliens had discovered his love for running and used it against him. They forced him to watch holographic projections of his family being chased by alien soldiers. His parents, his sister, his young nephew, all running in terror while monsters pursued them. "Let me help them," Jinho shouted, struggling against his restraints. "Take me instead." But the aliens simply adjusted their equipment and made the images more vivid. Jinho's family looked so real he could almost touch them. His nephew was crying, reaching out for help that Jinho couldn't give. The marathon runner had run through pain many times before. But this was different. This pain came from inside, from watching people he loved suffer while he remained helpless. Still, he refused to give up. During the brief moments when the projections stopped, he would close his eyes and remember better times. Gathering strength for the next session, Eunji's torment was perhaps the cruelest. The aliens had learned about her work with children and created scenarios where she had to choose which child to save. The holograms showed burning buildings with children trapped on different floors. She could only save one group, and the others would die. "I won't choose," she said through tears. "I'll find a way to save them all." But the aliens forced her to watch, as her hesitation led to more deaths. They made her believe that her kindness was actually weakness, that caring for others only brought more suffering. Yet even as the images broke her heart, Yoonji found ways to resist. She began humming lullabies she used to sing to her students. The simple melodies helped her remember why she became a teacher in the first place. Children needed protection, hope, and love. That truth was stronger than any alien torture. Youngsu's test was different again. The aliens had noticed his natural leadership abilities and created scenarios where his decisions led to disaster. They showed him crowds of people following his orders, only to be led into traps. They made him watch as his guidance resulted in death and suffering for those who trusted him. "You want me to stop caring about others?" Youngsu realized after days of these sessions. "You want me to become selfish and afraid to make decisions." But the factory worker had learned something important during his years organizing people. True leadership wasn't about being perfect or never making mistakes. It was about taking responsibility and never giving up on those who depended on you. During the few minutes between torture sessions, when guards changed shifts or equipment was adjusted, the humans began to communicate. It started with simple sounds. So-young would tap on her cell wall in a pattern. From the next cell, she heard an answering tap. Soon she realized it was Morse code. Jinho discovered that the ventilation system carried whispers between cells. When he hummed quietly, others could hear him and respond with their own melodies. The songs reminded them of home, of better times, of reasons to keep fighting. Youngji found that during meal delivery, she could see reflections in the polished food trays. By angling the metal carefully, she could send light signals to other cells. The simple flashes became a code, carrying messages of encouragement and hope. Yangsu mapped the guard patterns and discovered brief moments when prisoners were moved through the same corridors. During these precious seconds, the humans could exchange quick words, share information, and maintain their connections to each other. The aliens noticed the communication attempts and increased security. They installed better sound dampening, changed guard schedules randomly, and separated the humans further. But it was too late. The prisoners had already established something the aliens didn't understand, where the aliens expected isolation and despair. They found determination and unity. Where they expected the humans to break individually, they discovered a network of support that grew stronger under pressure. The humans were teaching each other how to survive, how to resist, and how to maintain hope even in the darkest circumstances. The breaking protocol was failing, and the aliens couldn't understand. Why? Technician Veltar stared at the data on his screen with growing confusion. For 6 months, he had been running the breaking protocol on the human subjects, and the results made no sense, according to every measurement the humans should have. Surrendered weeks ago, the tall gray alien had processed thousands of species across the galaxy. The method was always the same. Identify the strongest individuals, isolate them, break their spirit through psychological pressure, then use them as examples to control the rest of their people. It had worked on the warrior clans of Rigel, the hive minds of Zeta Prime, and the proud merchants of the Outer Rim. But these humans were different. Veltar walked through the observation corridor, watching the prisoners through one-way glass. In Cell 7, the human called Jinho was exercising again. Despite months of torture sessions, the runner maintained his physical strength. Even more puzzling, he had somehow taught the other prisoners his exercise routines during their brief moments of contact. "Why do you continue?" Veltar had asked Jinho during yesterday's session. The human had looked directly at him with clear eyes. "Because my body is mine. You can hurt it, but you can't make me give up on it." The concept troubled Veltar. In Kethver society, individual bodies belong to the collective. Personal ownership of anything, including oneself, was an alien idea. In the next cell, Yoonji was singing softly to herself. The kindergarten teacher had endured the cruelest psychological tortures, was forced to watch simulated children die because of her choices. Yet she continued to find strength in her memories of real children she had taught. Her songs were lullabies, gentle melodies that somehow reached other prisoners through the facility's walls. Guard Commander Zekanel had been assigned to stop the human communication network. But the more he studied their behavior, the more questions arose in his mind. Yesterday, he had watched Yanji comfort another prisoner who was having a breakdown. She had risked punishment to share her food with someone who was starving. "Why do you help others when it brings you pain?" Zekanel had asked. "Because that's what makes life worth living," Yoonji had replied simply. The answer haunted Zekanel. During his rest periods, Kethver had evolved beyond such inefficient emotions. They had achieved perfect order by eliminating individual desires and focusing only on collective goals. But watching these humans, Zekanel began to wonder what they had lost in that process. Dr. Soyoung had turned her cell into a laboratory of sorts. The scientist used every opportunity to study her captors, memorizing their routines, their reactions, their weaknesses. She had discovered something remarkable. The aliens were changing too. She noticed it first in small things. Technician Veltar would pause longer during observations, his head tilted as if listening to something. Guard Commander Zekanel asked questions that went beyond standard interrogation procedures. Even the lower-ranking aliens who delivered food seemed to linger, watching the humans with what could only be described as curiosity. "They're not immune to us," Soyoung whispered to Youngsu. during a brief moment when their transport paths crossed, were affecting them somehow. Yang-Su had made the same observation. The factory workers' natural leadership abilities had transformed even captivity into a form of organization. Through whispered words, tapped signals, and brief glances, he had created a network that spanned the entire facility. The humans shared information, coordinated resistance, and maintained morale despite their separation. But more importantly, they were teaching their captors about concepts. The Kethver had forgotten. Worker-class alien Nixel had been tasked with food distribution for 3 months. Every day he watched the human prisoners share their meager rations with weaker individuals. When Haijin, the violinist, gave her portion to an injured Yang-Su, Nixel felt something he had never experienced before. "Why do you sacrifice for others?" Nixel asked through the feeding slot. "Because he needs it more than I do," Haijin replied, her voice weak from hunger, but her eyes bright with determination. The concept of voluntary sacrifice for another individual was incomprehensible to Nixel. In Kethver society, resources were distributed according to rank and function. Personal choice didn't enter the equation, yet this human female had chosen to suffer so another could be stronger. That night, Nixel made his first independent decision in decades. He gave Haijin an extra portion of food, telling himself it was to keep the subjects healthy for further testing. But deep inside, he knew the real reason. He wanted to see more of this thing called kindness. The changes spread through the facility like a virus. Lower-ranking Kethver began questioning orders they had followed without thought for centuries. Why was hierarchy more important than individual choice? Why did collective efficiency matter more than personal connections? Technician Veltar found himself deliberately failing to report certain prisoner activities. When Soyoung successfully passed a message to Jinho, Veltar pretended not to notice. When Youngji organized a coordinated song that reached prisoners, across 3 levels, he classified it as non-threatening vocalization. The facility that was designed to break human spirits had become something unprecedented. A place where 2 species were learning uncomfortable truths about themselves. The humans were discovering the depths of their own strength, while the Kethver were rediscovering emotions and concepts they had abandoned long ago. The breaking protocol was not just failing, it was reversing. The species that was supposed to be broken was instead breaking something far more fundamental, the very foundation of Kethver society itself. The first crack in the Kethver system came from the most unexpected source. Worker-class alien Nixel had been delivering food to the human prisoners for 8 months. His job was simple: push the food through the slot, collect the empty containers, move to the next cell. No conversation, no eye contact, no deviation from routine. But Nixel had been watching. Every day, he saw the same thing that confused him. More and more, the humans shared their food, not just sometimes, but always. The strong ones gave portions to the weak ones. The healthy ones helped the sick ones. It made no logical sense. On this particular morning, Nixel watched Haijin push her entire meal through the bars to the cell next door, where an elderly human man lay sick with fever. She hadn't eaten properly in 3 days, but she still gave away her food. Why? Nixel asked, speaking for the first time in months. Haijin looked up at him with tired eyes. Because that's what humans do. We take care of each other. But you will become weak. You might die. Maybe, she said softly. But if I let him die when I could help, then I'm not really human anymore. Tss. The words hit Nixel like a physical blow. In Kethver society, weakness was eliminated. The strong survived, the weak served, and individual choice was irrelevant. But this human female was choosing to risk her life for someone who gave her nothing in return. That night, Nixel made a decision that would change everything. He brought extra food to Haijin's cell, not because his superiors ordered it, but because he wanted to. The feeling was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. Word of Nixel's actions spread through the lower ranks of Kethver workers. Soon, other aliens began making small acts of kindness. A guard left a blanket in Soyoung's cell when she shivered. A technician forgot to activate the pain device during Jinho's session. A maintenance worker fixed the broken water dispenser in Yoonji's cell without being asked. these tiny rebellions grew into something bigger. The worker-class Kethfer began asking questions that had been forbidden for thousands of years. Why? Did they have to follow orders without question? Why were their lives worth less than the higher castes? Why couldn't they make their own choices? Technician Veltar noticed the changes immediately. His daily reports were supposed to document the human's psychological breakdown. But instead, he found himself writing about their incredible resilience. Dr. So-Young had turned her torture sessions into learning opportunities, studying Kethfer psychology, and finding ways to connect with her captors. Ginho had maintained his physical and mental strength despite months of abuse, inspiring other prisoners to do the same. The most dangerous development was the communication network. Young-Soo had somehow managed to coordinate messages between prisoners across the entire facility. They shared information, provided emotional support, and maintained hope through the darkest moments. Even more troubling, some Kethfer guards were secretly helping them. The subjects are not responding to standard protocols, Veltar reported to his superior. But he left out the most important part. The protocols were failing, because the humans were changing their captors. Guard Commander Zekanel faced the most difficult decision of his career. For 3 days, he had been ordered to execute a human prisoner who had been caught organizing resistance activities. The prisoner was Young-Soo, the factory worker who had become a leader among the captives. Zetchnel stood outside Young-Soo's cell, weapon in hand, trying to find the will to follow orders. But every time he looked at the human, he remembered months of watching this man help others, organize hope, and refuse to surrender his dignity. "Are you going to kill me?" Young-Soo asked calmly. "Those are my orders," Zekanel replied. "Haven't you done it?" The question hung in the air between them. Zekanel realized he didn't have an answer. In his entire career, he had never hesitated to follow orders. But something had changed inside him, something the humans had infected him with. "Because," Zekanel said slowly, "I have learned from you that some things are more important than following orders." Instead of executing Young-Soo, Zekanel unlocked his cell. Then he moved to the next cell, and the next, releasing human prisoners who had become more than subjects to him. They had become individuals, each with their own stories, their own strength, their own worth. The rebellion spread through the facility like wildfire. Kethfer workers refused to continue the torture sessions. Guards abandoned their posts rather than hurt prisoners they had come to respect. Technicians deleted files and destroyed equipment rather than participate in the breaking protocol. When the facility commander demanded explanations, Guard Commander Zekanel stood before him with unprecedented defiance. Around him stood other Kethfer, who had chosen conscience over command. "We refuse to continue," Zekanel announced. "These humans have shown us what we lost when we chose control over connection. They have taught us that individual choice matters more than collective efficiency." The words that followed would be remembered across the galaxy. "We have learned from them that some things grow stronger when you try to break them. And we have decided that we want to be strong in the way they are strong." The facility that was built to break human spirits had instead broken the chains that bound the Kethfer to their own oppression. The revolution had begun, not with weapons or violence, but with the simple human truth that every individual life has value. The message spread across the galaxy faster than the Kethfer High Command could contain it. On distant worlds, in processing facilities aboard warships, the same story was being whispered. The humans could not be broken. And they were teaching others to be unbreakable too. Dr. So-Young stood in what had once been an interrogation chamber, now converted into a meeting room. Around her sat former prisoners and former guards planning together for the first time. The sight would have been impossible just weeks ago, but everything had changed. "Reports are coming in from 17 different systems," announced Veltar. The technician who had become one of the first Kethfer converts, processing facilities shutting down, guards refusing orders, entire colonies declaring independence from the High Command. Jinho limped over to join the group, his body still recovering from months of torture, but his spirit stronger than ever. "What about Earth? Have we heard anything from our home?" Young-Soo looked up from the communication device he had been studying. The factory worker had become their unofficial coordinator. His natural leadership abilities now openly acknowledged by both humans and Kethver alike. The invasion fleets above Earth have stopped all aggressive actions. Some ships are even withdrawing. The transformation had not been violent. There were no great battles, no massive explosions or heroic last stands. Instead, the change had come from within, spreading through the Kethver Empire like water finding cracks in stone. On the warship orbiting Jupiter, Commander Rathkal received orders to begin the final phase of Earth's subjugation. But half his crew had been following the reports from the processing facilities. They had heard about humans who refused to break, about Kethver who had chosen individual conscience over collective orders. "Sir," his second-in-command said quietly, "the crew is requesting permission to refuse these orders." Rathkal stared at the tactical display showing Earth's blue surface. For centuries, he had conquered worlds without question. It now. For the first time, he found himself asking why. What was the point of controlling a species that grew stronger under pressure? What was the value of domination if it required destroying everything that made life meaningful? "Send a message to Earth," Rathkal decided. "Tell them we wish to talk." Back in the facility, Yonji worked with a group of young Kethver who had never experienced kindness before. The kindergarten teacher was doing what she did best, helping others learn and grow. But instead of teaching children to read, she was teaching aliens to understand emotions they had forgotten. "This feeling when I help others?" asked a worker-class Kethver named Dexim. "What do humans call it?" Yonji replied with a gentle smile. "You feel joy when you make someone else's life better." The concept was spreading through Kethver. Society like a revelation. For thousands of years they had believed that efficiency and order were the highest goals. But the humans had shown them something different. That connection, choice, and compassion could create a different kind of strength. Hyjin had become an unexpected ambassador. The violinist's music had always been her way of expressing emotions, and now she used it to bridge the gap between species. Her concerts, held in the facility's main hall, drew audiences of both humans and Kethver. The aliens had never heard music that expressed individual feelings rather than collective harmony. "Your songs make me feel things I have no words for," Guard Commander Zekanel told her after one performance. "That's what music is for," Hyjin replied. "To help us understand feelings that are too big for words." The liberation of Earth came not through military victory, but through voluntary surrender. Kethver fleets across the galaxy began returning to their home systems, not in defeat, but in transformation. They carried with them the human concepts of individual worth, personal choice, and the strength that comes from caring for others. The High Command tried to stop the revolution, but it was too late. You cannot order someone to stop caring. You cannot command someone to abandon hope. The humans had infected the Kethver with ideas that were more powerful than any weapon. On worlds throughout the Empire, Kethver began choosing their own paths. For the first time in millennia, some formed partnerships with humans, learning to build societies based on cooperation rather than domination. Others struck out on their own, exploring what it meant to be individuals rather than parts of a collective. Machine Dr. Soyoung found herself addressing the Galactic Council, a body that had been formed from the ruins of the Kethver Empire. Representatives from dozens of worlds, both human and alien, gathered to discuss their shared future. "You came to break us," she said, looking directly at the Kethver delegates who had once been her captors. "You believed that strength meant the absence of weakness, that control meant the elimination of choice. But you discovered something your empire never understood." She paused, remembering the long months in the white cells, the torture sessions, the moments when hope seemed impossible. True strength comes from connections that cannot be severed, from hope that grows under pressure, and from the willingness to sacrifice for others. You tried to break us, but instead, we broke the idea that any thinking being should live without freedom, dignity, or choice. The galaxy would never be the same. The species that was meant to be broken had instead broken the cycle of domination itself, proving that humanity's greatest weapon was not technology or strategy, but the stubborn refusal to surrender what made them human.